Welcome back to the reading of My Story to His Glory, written by Lester Sumrall. Please subscribe to the channel. This is the reading of chapter 5. Before we begin, if you'd like to give, say thank you for getting you through Bible school. I would appreciate it. Chapter 5, At the Appointed Time. On December 18, 1931, the night of my second and last vision, far away in London, England, Howard Carter was praying. God spoke to this former inventor, son of an inventor, theologian, and Hampstead Bible Institute president. He was so moved by what he sensed God was telling him that he wrote the words of the message down. I have found a companion for thee. I have called a worker to stand beside thee. He hath heard my call. He respondeth, he joineth thee in the work to which I have called thee. I have called him, although thou hast not seen him. He is called and chosen, and shalt join thee. Behold, he cometh from afar. He cometh to help thee, to carry thy burden, and be a strength at thy side. And thou shalt find pleasure in his service, and shalt delight in his fellowship. He shalt come at the time appointed, and shalt not tarry. At a time thou thinkest not shalt he appear, even when thou art engaged in my work. Carter read that to his Bible Institute teachers. Since he wasn't a married man, at first his co-workers thought it meant that he would be meeting and marrying a pretty woman in some other country. But Carter set them straight. The prophecy hadn't said anything about a woman. In fact, the personal pronoun reference all the way through had been he. 18 months after that, this great man of God came to America. I'd never heard of him. He'd never heard of me. By this time, I was preaching in Oklahoma, and in that way whereby I know when God is telling me to do something. I sensed that I was to go to Eureka Springs, Arkansas. I knew of the tri-state camp meeting being held there and felt certain that it was God's will for me to attend. I closed out my revival meeting, and my sister and I drove 150 miles to Eureka Springs. We left with objections of the local pastor ringing in our ears, but I felt compelled to go. Upon arriving, Leona and I went to a teaching service where Howard Carter was speaking. When he was finished, he went outside, and so did I. I walked up, shook his hand, and introduced myself and said, "Thank you for the word of God." Then I heard myself saying some very strange things. "You know, I'll go with you wherever you go. I'll help you. I'll strengthen you. It would be a pleasure and a delight to fellowship with you." Years later, in an article that appeared in our World Harvest magazine, Howard Carter told of that encounter. His words excited me. He was repeating the message of God that God had given me in London. When I heard the very words of the Lord's message to me flowing from his lips, I was immediately convinced that a miracle was taking place. The matter certainly amazed me, and I said within myself that this young man was, without a doubt, the one whom the Lord had spoken in 1931. Howard Carter asked me to come with him, and he said he had something he wanted to show me. Another gentleman accompanied us, and when we got to Carter's hotel room, he pulled out a little black book. And then he and the man went to one corner of the room, and Carter showed him the book. I could hear, "Oh," from first one and then the other. Then they came back to me, and Carter explained, "Young man, it seems that God has done something very unusual today. Now it is my turn to say, oh." "What do you mean?" he asked. "Well, I'm an evangelist," I replied. "Do you have any intention of being a missionary?" he questioned. "I'm on my way around the world right now," I quickly replied. "You are?" His voice showed his delight and surprise. Then he added, "How long have you known that you were supposed to go around the world?" "For 18 months, ever since I had a vision of the world going to hell." Then I told him about my vision. Carter had me sit down. "I want to show you something, Lester," he said. "God gave me a prophecy 18 months ago. It appears that it was at the same time that he gave you your vision. Here, read this. I wrote it down immediately afterward. I took the black book, and there I read, He is called and chosen. Can you imagine how overwhelmed I was at that moment? Sensing my amazement, Carter said, the very words you spoke to me outside there on the sidewalk. He began to explain to me about the 9 gifts of the Spirit and that the word of wisdom was one such gift. I had not walked into Howard Carter's life by mere chance. Are you willing to travel with me, he asked. I'm ready to go, I fairly shouted. We shook hands and parted company. Leona and I started driving to Mobile, Alabama, where our family had moved since I started preaching. On the way, I was telling Leona all about the conversation with Howard Carter, and I remembered that I hadn't even given him an address where I could be reached. I knew he was on his way to the West Coast, and from there he would begin his journey around the world. So I lost him. In the same hour when he found me and I found him, we lost each other. But I had a beautiful peace. Leona, I said, I'm going to sell my car, get a passport, and then get a ticket to California, and I'll catch up with Howard Carter. When we reached our parents' home, and they learned of my plans, my father really thought I was out of my mind. Imagine thinking you could start off on an around-the-world trip to preach the gospel when you barely had enough money to get to California. And that's the conclusion of chapter 5.